12 fast attack craft, throttles pinned, fan out across open Pacific water, and drive straight at the outer picket of a U.S. carrier strike group. They are small, they are fast, they are cheap, and there are enough of them that shooting one missile per boat would cost the defending destroyer more money than the entire attacking fleet is worth. That is not an accident. That is the strategy. The question the screen commander faces in the next 4 minutes is not whether his Arleigh Burke-class destroyer can hit those boats. It can hit every single one of them. The question is what it costs to do it, and whether the enemy has already done the math before he has. Here's what most people picture when they imagine a modern naval engagement. The high-tech side fires a missile, the threat disappears, problem solved. The evidence tells a different story. When the threat is a swarm of $20,000 plywood hull speedboats and your interceptor costs $4 million a round, firing that missile is not a victory. It is exactly the exchange rate the swarm was designed to force. What we are going to walk through is how layered defense actually works in this scenario. Not one expensive answer, but 3 cheap ones stacked in sequence. An Aegis radar that sorts the chaos before the chaos arrives. An A-10 Warthog that breaks the charge for the price of ammunition. And a pair of Mark 38 chain guns that handle whatever gets through to 2 miles. By the end, you will understand exactly why the destroyer commander holds his SM-6 interceptors in reserve, and what that decision tells us about the future of naval warfare in the Pacific. Let us set the scene, because the geography matters. Open Pacific. A U.S. Navy carrier strike group is operating roughly 300 miles off a contested coastline. At the center sits an aircraft carrier, the group's primary asset and primary target. Surrounding her in expanding rings are cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and logistics ships. The outermost ring, the picket line, is where the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operates. She is the first thing an adversary encounters, and she carries the group's most capable air and missile defense systems. The AN/SPY-1D phased array radar, the Aegis combat management system, a 96-cell vertical launch system loaded with a mix of SM-2, SM-6, and ESSM interceptors, a Phalanx CIWS close-in weapon system for last-ditch point defense, and 2 Mark 38 25mm chain gun mounts on the ship's rails. Against an incoming ballistic missile or a supersonic anti-ship weapon, all of that capability is exactly what you want. Against 12 fast attack craft charging from 20 miles out, it is a sledgehammer aimed at a swarm of wasps. The fast attack craft in this scenario are a well-understood threat. Small fiberglass or aluminum hulls, typically 30 to 40 feet in length, powered by outboard motors capable of 40 to 50 knots, armed with machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and in some configurations, anti-ship missiles or torpedoes. Their radar cross-section is tiny, their speed is high, and their tactical value is not any single boat. It is the number of simultaneous engagements they force a defender to manage. A 12-boat swarm approaching at 45 knots covers 20 miles in roughly 26 minutes. That sounds like a comfortable window. It is not. The first 10 minutes are spent confirming track, sorting the contact picture, and pushing targeting data up the chain of command. The middle 10 minutes are the decision window. The last 6 minutes are where Doctrine either holds or collapses. The Aegis system picks up the swarm at first contact, roughly 18 to 20 miles. The AN/SPY-1D radar does not see one boat. It sees 12 separate tracks, each moving at high speed, each on a converging course toward the carrier. The system assigns track numbers, calculates intercept geometry, and begins feeding firing solutions to the Combat Direction Center below decks. Here's where the screen commander faces his first real problem. The math is not hard. 12 boats. 96 cells in the vertical launch system, but most of those cells carry SM-6 interceptors. Missiles optimized for destroying aircraft and ballistic warheads at range, not for hunting 30-foot speedboats inside 15 miles. Firing one SM-6 per boat costs $48 million and empties half the destroyer's magazine. Against a follow-on air or missile threat, which in any competent adversary plan would arrive 30 minutes after the swarm, that magazine is now depleted where it is needed most. The swarm is not the main attack. The swarm is the forcing function. It is designed to make the defender spend the wrong currency at the wrong moment. What is most striking about this cost of exchange problem is not the dollar figures. It is how precisely adversary planners have done this arithmetic. They know the SM-6's unit cost. They know how many cells an Arleigh Burke carries. They know that if they can force the destroyer to burn through precision interceptors on cheap hulls, the real strike package arriving behind the swarm finds a weakened picket. The screen commander knows this too, which is why he does not reach for the SM-6. He reaches for the radio. The carrier strike group's air cover on this day includes a flight of A-10 Warthogs operating from the carrier's deck. An unconventional configuration, because the A-10 is an Air Force platform and does not normally deploy aboard Navy carriers. But in joint operations, particularly in the Pacific Theater's island chain geometry, close air support assets can be forward staged at expeditionary airfields or operating alongside Navy formations. For the purposes of this scenario, we place the A-10 element at Alert 5 status aboard the carrier. Engines running, ordnance loaded, pilot strapped in, 30 seconds from wheels up. In a real joint operation, those aircraft might be 5 minutes away rather than 30 seconds. The Doctrine holds either way. The A-10 Warthog was designed to kill Soviet armor in the Fulda Gap. It carries a GAU-8/A Avenger rotary cannon, a weapon so large the entire aircraft was essentially engineered around it. 7 barrels, 30mm rounds, a sustained rate of fire of roughly 4,000 rounds per minute. In practice, pilots fire in bursts of half a second to 2 full seconds, between 30 and over 100 rounds per trigger pull. Each round is roughly the size of a wine bottle, and the depleted uranium armor-piercing variant travels at roughly 1 kilometer per second. Against a fiberglass fast attack craft, this is not a fair fight. The A-10 element, 2 aircraft, gets the call from the destroyer's screen commander. The contact picture is already on their data link. Track positions, speeds, headings. The lead aircraft rolls out of Alert 5, climbs to attack altitude, and begins its run. From 15,000 feet, the approaching swarm is visible as a fan of white wakes against dark blue water. The A-10 does not need a sophisticated targeting solution for this engagement. The boats are moving fast, but they are not maneuvering violently, because at 45 knots in open water, violent maneuvers bleed speed and break formation. The pilot has a clean geometry. He rolls in. The GAU-8 opens up. The first burst walks across the lead 3 boats in sequence. At 4,000 rounds per minute, a 2-second burst delivers roughly 130 rounds across a target string. Against thin-hulled fast attack craft, a single hit from a 30mm round is frequently sufficient to disable the engine, ignite fuel, or compromise the hull's structural integrity entirely. The lead boat stops. The second catches fire. The third shears off from the formation as its helmsman reacts. Here's the cost of that pass. Approximately $1,100 in ammunition. Compare that to one SM-6 at $4 million. The math is not subtle. The second A-10 follows the leader's run, offset by roughly 200 meters, and walks its cannon across the right flank of the swarm. 2 more boats are disabled. The remaining 7 break formation. They are no longer a coordinated attack. They are 7 individual boats at high speed, dispersing across open water, trying to present harder targeting geometry. A dispersed swarm is a managed problem. A coherent swarm driving at a carrier is a different one entirely. The A-10 gun run has accomplished the primary objective in less than 90 seconds of on-target time. The charge formation is broken. Put yourself in the seat of the swarm commander for a moment. You planned this attack assuming the destroyer would burn missiles. Instead, an aircraft you did not expect arrives at low cost and dismantles your formation before you reach the missile defense engagement zone. Your boats are scattering. Your timing window for a coordinated attack is gone, and you still have to deal with what is waiting inside 2 miles. The swarm's coordination is broken. 7 boats remain, and the A-10s are already climbing back to altitude for a second pass, but the screen commander does not wait. The Mark 38S are already tracking. The Mark 38 25mm chain gun does not get as much attention as the Phalanx CIWS or the SM-6, and that is a mistake. It is a medium-caliber automatic cannon mounted on a stabilized platform on the destroyer's rails, slave to the ship's fire control radar, capable of engaging surface targets out to roughly 2 to 2.5 miles. In a fast attack craft scenario, it is the right tool for the engagement band between 2 miles and the ship's hull. Too close for missiles, too far for small arms, exactly right for a chain gun. The 7 surviving boats, now dispersed and individually maneuvering, are approaching the 2-mile boundary in staggered order. The destroyer's fire control system has each one tracked. The Mark 38 on the port quarter slews to the nearest contact and opens fire. The 25mm rounds are smaller than the A-10's 30mm, but at this range and against these targets, they are more than adequate. The first leaker takes a burst amidships at roughly 1.8 miles. It loses power and goes dead in the water. The second is engaged at 1.5 miles. Similar result. The third attempts a hard turn to close the destroyer's stern quarter, which is a tactically sound instinct because the stern presents a smaller radar return and the guns have a slightly harder tracking geometry there. But the Mark 38's stabilized mount compensates, the fire control system adjusts, and the third boat takes a burst at 1.2 miles. 4 boats remain. They are inside 1 mile now. This is the band where the Phalanx CIWS would handle an air target, a supersonic missile arriving at Mach 2. Against surface contacts, Phalanx can engage, but its fire control radar is optimized for aerial threats, and its engagement geometry for fast surface movers at close range is less clean. The Screen Commander keeps Phalanx cold for its primary mission: last-ditch defense against anti-ship missiles that might be coming behind the swarm. The 2 A-10s are inbound on their second pass. The lead aircraft arrives over the remaining 4 boats at 800 feet and walks the GAU-8 across all 4 in a single sustained burst. 3 stop immediately. The fourth, struck but not destroyed, closes to 600 meters before losing steering and going broadside in its own wake. The engagement is effectively over. Elapsed time from first A-10 contact to last leaker stopped, 11 minutes. The destroyer's SM-6 magazine is untouched. The Phalanx CIWS never fired a round. The engagement cost: approximately $40,000 in A-10 ammunition and Mark 38 rounds, plus the fuel and sortie cost of 2 A-10 flights. A figure in the low hundreds of thousands when you account for everything. The swarm cost roughly those numbers to build and deliver. The defense cost roughly the same to stop it. That exchange rate is what Doctrine is supposed to produce. But here is the part that does not sit easily, even after walking through a clean, successful defense. The scenario we just described assumed things went right. What happens when they do not? One detail that stuck with me when going through open source analysis of fast boat swarm tactics: the coordination problem cuts both ways. The attacker has to maintain formation discipline under fire, but the defender has to maintain accurate track discrimination when 12 small, fast, low radar cross-section contacts are moving at high speed in close proximity to each other, and potentially to civilian maritime traffic. In a real engagement, the contact picture is not clean. There are fishing vessels in the area. There are contacts moving at angles inconsistent with an attack. There are contacts that look like decoys. The Aegis system's track management is extraordinarily capable, but it processes what the radar sees, and a skilled adversary will do everything possible to complicate that picture. This is obstacle number 1 in a real-world version of this scenario: the identification problem. Rules of engagement require positive identification before weapons release in most circumstances. Against an incoming ballistic warhead at Mach 10, there is no ambiguity. Against a swarm of fast boats at 15 miles, in a region with commercial fishing traffic, there is significant ambiguity, and resolving it costs time. The A-10 gun run works cleanly in our scenario because we stipulated the attacking boats were positively identified hostile. Getting to that determination in a real engagement is not automatic. It requires ISR assets, cross-referencing with known vessel databases, communication with maritime patrol aircraft or satellites, and a command decision under time pressure. The second obstacle: weather. The Pacific in certain seasons is not the flat blue surface this scenario implies. In sea states above 3 or 4, small boats like the ones in this swarm are doing something far more violent than making clean 45-knot runs. They are pitching, yawing, surfing wave faces, occasionally going airborne. The A-10's gun run against a 12-boat formation in calm water is a different proposition than the same run against 12 boats scattering through 4-meter swells. The GAU-8 is still lethal. The targeting geometry is harder, the burst lengths need adjustment, and the pilot's own aircraft handling becomes a factor. The Screen Commander knew this before the engagement began. He planned for it. He factored in a degradation in gun effectiveness and built margin into the timeline. That margin came from the Aegis radar's early detection. 18 to 20 miles of warning translated into a clean decision window, even with the identification and weather overhead factored in. Layered defense works precisely because each layer does not have to be perfect. The A-10 does not have to stop every boat. It has to break the formation and degrade the numbers. The Mark 38 does not have to stop every leaker. It has to handle what the aircraft leave behind. The Phalanx CIWS does not have to engage every surface contact. It stays cold for its primary air defense mission, the one thing that cannot be delegated to a cheaper system. Here's what strikes me about this engagement as a case study. The Doctrine is not primarily about weapons. It is about sequencing and cost management. The US military has spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars building precision. The SM-6 is a product of that investment, a weapon that can intercept a ballistic missile in its terminal phase at ranges exceeding 200 miles, engage aerial targets beyond the radar horizon using data link guidance, and be retasked mid-flight. It is arguably the most capable surface-to-air interceptor in the world, and the correct answer in this scenario was to leave it alone. The lesson is harder than it looks. Every instinct in a combat system optimized for precision says, use the precision weapon. It is more reliable. It has a higher single-shot probability of engagement. It removes uncertainty. But precision is finite. 96 cells is 96 cells, and a carrier strike group operates in an environment where those cells need to cover anti-ship ballistic missiles arriving at Mach 5, cruise missiles flying at 50 feet above the water, and hypersonic glide vehicles doing things that would have been considered physically impossible 20 years ago. Spending $4 million per $20,000 boat is not just a bad economic choice in isolation. It is a strategic gift to an adversary who planned the swarm specifically to drain that magazine. Here is the uncomfortable take, and I will say it directly. Most military spending analysis focuses on the cost of the systems that do the shooting. The harder question, the one that actually determines outcomes, is the cost ratio between the attacker's expendable assets and the defender's consumable responses. An adversary that can build fast attack craft at $20,000 each and force a $4 million response per boat does not need to destroy the destroyer. It needs to repeat that exchange rate enough times that the magazine is empty before the real strike package arrives. The A-10 breaks that logic. It costs roughly $18 to $20 million per airframe, but the sortie cost is in the low hundreds of thousands, and the ammunition is under $2,000 per target engagement. More importantly, the airframe can fly multiple sorties against a swarm and return to the carrier with fuel and rounds remaining. In cost of exchange terms, it is the correct answer, provided it can get there, provided identification is clean, and provided the swarm does not have effective anti-air capability of its own. That last caveat matters. A fast attack craft armed with a man-portable air defense system, AMANPADS, like a shoulder-fired infrared missile, presents a real threat to a low and slow platform like the A-10 operating at gun run altitude. The A-10 was designed for a high-threat anti-air environment and has significant defensive capabilities. Chaff dispensers, flares, the titanium bathtub protecting the pilot, but it is not invulnerable. An adversary that adds even a few MANPADS to its fast attack craft has significantly complicated the gun run option. This is why the Mark 38 exists as Layer 3 rather than as the primary response. If the A-10 element is not available, or if the threat environment denies low-altitude aircraft access, the destroyer's own guns become the primary surface engagement system, and the engagement geometry compresses. The margin for error shrinks. The phalanx begins to look like it might need to engage surface targets after all. The defense held cleanly today. The magazine is intact. The formation is safe. But 300 miles to the east, a second swarm is being staged. And this one has MANPADS aboard every third boat. What does this tell us about the larger picture? The Pacific Theater is the defining strategic contest of this decade. The distances involved are staggering. The first island chain spans roughly 2,000 miles from north to south, and operating inside that chain means operating within range of land-based anti-ship missiles, shore-based fast attack craft, and a maritime militia that numbers in the thousands of vessels. The People's Liberation Army Navy has invested heavily in exactly the kind of asymmetric capabilities that make the cost of exchange problem worse for a defender with expensive precision weapons. Large numbers of fast attack craft, anti-ship cruise missiles in the subsonic and supersonic range, and ballistic anti-ship missiles like the DF-21D and DF-26 designed to hold carrier strike groups at risk at ranges beyond 1,000 miles. Against that background, the layered defense we walked through is not just a tactical choice, it is a strategic philosophy. The US Navy does not win by having the most expensive weapons. It wins by preserving the right weapons for the right threats while using the cheapest effective tool for everything else. Would you have held the SM-6 in that 4-minute decision window? Or would the pressure of 12 fast boats closing on your carrier have made you reach for the most reliable system in the magazine? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the decision every screen commander in a real engagement faces, and the answer is not obvious when you are the one watching the tracks converge on the radar. Let us look at what the numbers actually show when you put the full picture together. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer displaces roughly 9,000 tons at full load. Its vertical launch system carries 90 to 96 cells depending on the specific flight variant. In a typical mixed loadout for Pacific operations, those cells contain a combination of SM-6 Block I and Block IA interceptors, with the IA variant offering improved range against terminal phase threats. along with SM-2 medium-range missiles for conventional air defense, ESSM Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles for close-in air defense, and Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack. The specific mix is classified, but publicly available analysis consistently estimates that a fully loaded Arleigh Burke carries somewhere between 24 and 36 SM-6 interceptors as a rough working figure for planning purposes. 24 SM-6S against a 12-boat swarm fired 1 per boat. 12 missiles expended, 50% of the SM-6 magazine empty, and the follow-on threat environment is now significantly more dangerous. Against a coordinated attack that sequences the swarm ahead of an anti-ship ballistic missile salvo, which is exactly how a competent adversary would use it, that depleted magazine is a problem. The A-10 sortie against the same swarm. 2 aircraft, 1 to 2 passes, approximately 4,000 rounds expended between them, 4 to 6 boats disabled on the first pass, the remainder broken and scattered. Total ammunition cost under $10,000. The aircraft returned to the carrier with ordnance remaining. The math is not complicated. What is complicated is getting to the conditions that make the math work. The A-10 has to be available. The weather has to permit the gun run. The identification has to be clean. The swarm cannot have effective air defense. And the command system has to function fast enough to get the aircraft on target before the swarm reaches the missile engagement zone. I spent time going through open source analysis of Pacific maritime scenarios, and one pattern kept coming up. The scenarios where layered defense fails are not scenarios where the weapons stop working. They are scenarios where the decision cycle broke down. The radar sees the contacts, but the identification process takes too long. The aircraft is on the right frequency, but the data link has a format incompatibility. The chain of command requires an authorization that adds 3 minutes to the response time. 3 minutes at 45 knots is 3.5 miles. The geometry of the problem changes completely. This is why the Aegis system's automation matters as much as its raw capability. The AN/SPY 1D radar tracks simultaneously in multiple bands. The Aegis combat management system processes that track picture and generates firing solutions without waiting for a human to work through the numbers manually. The screen commander does not tell the system which targets to track. The system tells the screen commander what it sees and presents him with recommended responses. His job is to authorize or override, not to calculate. That design philosophy, put the human at the decision point, not the calculation point, is what allows a single destroyer with a crew of roughly 300 to manage an engagement picture that would have required an entire fleet's worth of coordination in an earlier era. The swarm scenario is solved. But here's the thing nobody mentions in the clean post-engagement analysis. What the A-10's gun run looked like from the carrier's CIC was a moment of genuine uncertainty before it looked like anything else. For roughly 90 seconds during the first gun pass, the Aegis system was tracking an engagement in which its own radar picture was complicated by an allied aircraft operating low and slow in the threat sector. The A-10 has a radar cross-section that is not negligible at 15,000 feet. The Aegis fire control system was discriminating between its own aircraft and the swarm contacts in real time, while simultaneously managing the Mark 38 targeting data and monitoring the western sector for the follow-on threat picture. This is the integration problem that does not show up in simple cost of exchange analysis. Layered defense is not just about having multiple weapons. It is about having those weapons talk to each other without creating fratricide risk or system saturation. The A-10 carries a transponder broadcasting IFF. Identification friend or foe, codes that the Aegis system recognizes. The Mark 38's fire control is deconflicted from the A-10's flight path by altitude separation and sector assignment. The procedures exist. They work. But they require training. They require interoperability standards that are continuously maintained, and they require that every system in the chain is running current software with compatible data link formats. Here's the part that gets overlooked. The most expensive thing in this engagement is not the SM-6 that was never fired. It is the training and integration infrastructure that made it possible to not fire it. The CIWS systems that were maintained at readiness. The Mark 38 crews that run quarterly live fire exercises. The A-10 pilots that have practiced maritime surface attack profiles, which are not their primary training focus, well enough to execute cleanly under time pressure. The Aegis system software updates that ensure the destroyer's radar is running the current threat library. The joint communications protocols that let an Air Force aircraft operating with a Navy formation talk to that formation's combat management system without translation delays. None of that is cheap. None of it shows up in the per engagement cost calculation. All of it is what made the $4 million SM-6 unnecessary. What this tells us about the balance of power in the Pacific is something both sides of the strategic competition understand, even if public discussion tends to focus on hardware rather than systems thinking. The People's Liberation Army Navy has built the world's largest fleet by hull count. It has invested in asymmetric capabilities specifically designed to exploit the cost of exchange problem. Anti-ship ballistic missiles that threaten carrier strike groups at standoff range, fast attack craft in numbers that stress a defender's magazine management, electronic warfare systems that aim to degrade the radar and communications links that make layered defense function, and anti-satellite capabilities designed to blind the ISR architecture that feeds the identification process. Against that investment, the United States has responded not primarily by building more hulls or more missiles, but by deepening the integration and automation of the systems it already has. The SM-6's Block IA improvements are not primarily about raw performance. They are about engagement flexibility. The ability to retask a missile mid-flight based on updated track data, the ability to use cooperative engagement where one ship's radar cues another ship's interceptor, the ability to engage targets beyond the launching ship's own radar horizon. The A-10's role in this scenario points to a different kind of investment. The value of cheap, available, tactically flexible firepower that can be brought to bear without depleting the precision magazine. Whether that role is filled by an A-10 in joint operations, by an armed MQ-9 Reaper drone operating from the carrier's air wing, or by some future platform designed specifically for maritime surface attack at low cost per engagement is an open question. The A-10 is a Cold War design that was not built for this mission. It happens to be very good at it. That combination of attributes does not always survive the procurement process. Will the U.S. Navy invest in a dedicated low-cost maritime surface attack platform before the cost of exchange problem gets worse? Comment yes or no, because that is the procurement debate happening right now in the budget discussions, and the answer will determine whether the next swarm scenario plays out the same way. Here's the final picture. A 12-boat swarm charged a U.S. carrier strike group. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer's Aegis system sorted the contact picture in real time, identified the engagement geometry, and presented the screen commander with a clear decision. The SM-6s stayed in their cells. Not because the situation was not serious, but because it was exactly serious enough to preserve them for something worse. An A-10 Warthog rolled in and broke the formation for the price of ammunition. Mark 38 chain guns handled the leakers. The Phalanx CIWS held cold, ready for the anti-ship missile that might have been 30 minutes behind. The swarm failed not because it was outgunned. It was eventually. The swarm failed because the defense it encountered refused to play the game it was designed to win. It turned down the expensive missile exchange and substituted a cheap gun exchange. And that decision, made in a 4-minute window under pressure, by a screen commander managing a radar picture with 12 converging tracks while simultaneously monitoring his magazine state and the follow-on threat sector. That decision is the entire lesson. Doctrine is not a manual you read during the engagement. It is the thinking that happens beforehand, so that when the tracks converge on the radar, the commander already knows the answer. The next question is what happens when the swarm has air defense aboard, when the A-10 cannot make the gun run, when the cheap answer is taken off the table and the decision defaults back to the expensive one. That is a scenario that deserves its own breakdown, and it changes the math in ways that are genuinely uncomfortable. If you want to see that scenario, it is coming next. The magazine runs deeper than most people think, and the problems get harder before they get easier.